Thank you for joining me today for blending, braiding, and stacking funding for childcare providers. Today we are going to talk about how much money you need and what kinds of revenue sources you need to run your childcare business. But first, we need to talk about the fact that you are running a business and that you need to create a budget. So the first thing we're going to do is give you some resources about where you can go to get an overall picture and help develop the budget for your business. There are 2 guides that are available through the Colorado Department of Early Childhood. One is specifically for child care centers, and the second is specifically for family child care homes. These are going to be invaluable resources for you. They walk through everything that you would need on the expense side and everything that is a possibility for you on the revenue side. So visit the CDEC website for those guides. So the first thing you're going to do is project both your revenue and expenses in your budget. So realize that the income that you have available to you will vary depending upon the ages of the children that you're serving. Infants cost more, and your revenue streams are probably going to be higher to cover the cost of infants than preschoolers. Also, make sure that your private pay rate does at least cover your operational costs. You cannot sustain a business if your expenses are higher than your revenue. So you need to make sure that that is the case. So let's talk about some types of expenses that you might include when you're developing your budget.
Teacher salaries?
Teacher salaries, right. Whether or not you're a family child care home or a center, you still have to pay yourself. Or you have to pay your teachers in the center. So that's important, your staff. What else?
Overhead and utilities?
Overhead and utilities. You need to remember that you have overhead, whether you're leasing a building or it's in your own home. You have to maintain those facilities. You have to have insurance. You have to have all of those things that you would need that are common to running an overall business. Other things that you might want to think about are the supplies, putting in your playground equipment if you need that, maintaining the surface of the playground equipment. So all of those things are outlined in the guide, and you should think about making sure that you have all of those covered. All right, well, let's move on to the potential sources of income. So let's talk about some of the ones that we have here. The most common is tuition charged to parents. That traditionally has been the basis for revenue for early childhood programs. The Colorado Child Care Assistance Program, known as CCAP, and the program, the parent copay that goes with that. Colorado Universal Preschool, which Colorado's in their 2nd year of implementing Universal Preschool, and it's for 4-year-olds in their year before kindergarten. The Colorado Adult and Child Food Program, and this is the subsidy program for food. Whether or not you use this program because your kiddos are eligible for it, or you decide to have parents bring their own food, or you decide to work it into the tuition, food is something that you need to think about, and this is a possible funding source. There are state grants and bonuses through the Colorado Department of Early Childhood, and in the business guide that we have referred to on pages 21 and 22, there are lists of possible grants that you could look at. So please make sure that you bookmark those guides and that you go back to them and you look at them regularly. There's Head Start and Early Head Start partnerships that are a possibility. Military child care assistance if you are serving families who are military. There's special capital or facilities grants that you can take advantage of. Grants available through the Early Childhood Council here in El Paso County, that is joint initiatives. They are usually quality improvement grants, but not always. So once again, those are always up on the JI website, and you should visit that website and you should bookmark it and go back to them regularly to see if there are additional grants that are available. There's also private grants. Some are only available to child care providers who are nonprofits, but others are available to all licensed providers. Again, those are usually up on your Early Childhood Council's website, so visit that. Any thoughts as to what might be added to this list?
What about fundraising?
Fundraising. You know, that's interesting. Generally, fundraising is an option for child care providers who are nonprofits. There is a state tax credit for contributions to eligible child care providers, which is amazing, and so it encourages people to donate to the organization. There is also the opportunity for some for-profit organizations to access grants also. Anything else? All right, thank you. All right, let's talk about how the various funding sources can work together. It's important that you understand the difference between blending, braiding, and stacking so that you consider whether or not these funding sources are actually right for you. The first is blending, and this is when two or more funding sources are wrapped together to fund a specific part of the program or initiative. In blending, costs are not necessarily allocated out to the various funding sources. You can think of it as a great big pot in which all of the funding sources are thrown together, and that mixture, if you will, is used to fund whatever your project is that you're trying to accomplish. So that's blending. Braiding is when you have two or more funding sources that are coordinated to support the total cost of a service. So these revenues, the revenues are allocated out, and the expenses for the project are allocated separately to each one of the funding sources. This comes into play when one of your funding sources has certain requirements that they have how their money can be used, and they want to make sure that you followed those rules. So they want you to allocate out the money and then report to them how you spent their money to complete whatever the project is that they're funding. So that's braiding. And then stacking or layering is when you have two funding sources, two or more, where there is one that is foundational or on the bottom, if you will, and then there is another funding source that is stacked on top of that, and there could be a third or fourth funding source stacked on top of that. So in each one of these cases, there is an expectation that that program is going to stand alone in terms of the expenses that it is covering, and that any layer can be taken out of there and not affect the ability to be able to accomplish what you were doing with the rest of the funding sources. So think of it as a layer cake, if you will. All right, so let's talk about some examples of blending in early care and education. So the first example, remember this is where we put everything into the pot. ABC Childcare needs to replace its playground equipment and has been awarded 3 different grants for the same project. All grants were awarded based on the understanding that the funds will be blended to fund the entire project, and each funder only expects a report that the playground has been built using the total project funding. So this is an example of blending. All 3 sources have been thrown together to accomplish whatever it is that the money was given to you for. And you don't have to allocate expenses out to the 3 funding sources. Braiding is the next one. ABC Childcare is a UPK provider, so they have children who are 4 years old, and they offer full-day services for families of 8 children in their year before kindergarten. All children are eligible for 15 hours of UPK per week, free of charge to the family, in return for a payment from the state of $600 per month, which is a made-up amount, by the way, with certain restrictions on how those UPK funds can be used. So the provider's total cost per month is $10,000, And they know that because they've completed a budget and they know exactly what their costs are per month to provide services for these 8 children. The total cost will be covered by $4,800 from UPK, which is 8 children times $600 per month, and $6,200 from tuition charged to parents, and that's divided among 8 children. So these funds are braided to cover the total cost of providing care for 8 UPK eligible children because there are restrictions on how the UPK money can be spent. So UPK says these are the allowable expenses, and anything outside of that you cannot use the UPK money for. However, the provider money, the tuition is not restricted. You can use that for whatever you want. But because UPK is restricted, the provider must track how they are spending the UPK money to be able to report to the state as requested. So that's an example of braiding. So let's move on to stacking or layering. So again, this is where you think about this as a layer cake. So an example of funding for one child at ABC Childcare who is eligible for both UPK at 15 hours per week and is approved for a full day with the Child Care Assistance Program. The child attends 9 hours per day, and the funding for this child will stack like this. So the first 3 hours, so if you take 15 and you divide it by 5 days a week, you have 3 hours per day. The first 3 hours in a given day will be funded by Universal Preschool. And then you have 6 hours left, and this child is eligible for CCAP. So you can use CCAP for the other 6 hours. So that is the money that comes in from CCAP and the parent copay, and that funds the additional 6 hours. So this is an example of layering because you can still use CCAP for a child that is not eligible for UPK and still serve that child. So you've just taken that UPK layer out of the funding. So that's an example of stacking or layering. And I want to remind you that the UPK payment is based on enrollment, whereas CCAP is based on attendance. And that's definitely going to matter when you make a decision as to whether or not you want to use one or either of those funding sources, or both. So let's talk about what it is you need to consider in deciding the potential revenue sources that you're going to use. So the first thing is that not every funding source is created equal. Some of them are going to take more work than others. Some of them are just simply not going to work for you because you don't have eligible children. So let's look at the things that you would consider. So first is, what are the requirements of the funding source? What are the accounting and reporting requirements? Is it something that you have the capacity to meet? Do you have the time? Do you have the personnel to be able to do that reporting? Will the requirements of the funding source sufficiently benefit the services I can provide to children? So again, another way to look at that is it enough? Is it enough money to warrant the administrative costs? Do I have to invest in special equipment to take advantage of the funding source? Sometimes there are certain things you need to do to be able to administer the funding source. It might take a particular kind of equipment, and that might be something that you're expected to underwrite the cost of. So make sure you know what that might be. What am I trying to accomplish by accessing this funding source? Am I looking for a sustainable source of funding, or am I looking for one-time funding for maybe putting in a playground or replacing all of my furniture in my rooms? And that's a one-time funding source. But if you're looking for sustainable funding, one-time grants may not be the best answer. How will this funding source blend, braid, or stack with my other funding sources? So you already have base funding sources. Every child care provider does. Otherwise, you're not opening your business. So you have base funding. So when you're looking for new sources, will the eligibility requirements of each be compatible with who I am serving? Are you serving mostly middle and upper income families that won't be eligible for certain funding sources? Well, then maybe you don't want to take advantage or try to take advantage of that particular funding source. Does the funding source require stacking over braiding? Make sure that you know what the requirements are, and are you stacking one on top of the other, or are you able to braid them together so that you have a little bit more flexibility? Will that work for your business? Every business is different, so you have to think about if that'll work for your business. What are the requirements for my families? Will my families be eligible for that funding source? I use the example of CCAP. Universal preschool is another one. If you do not have any 4-year-olds, then obviously your families are not going to be eligible for that, and you're not going to go through you're not going to go through the work of becoming a UPK provider. Can they apply online, or do they have to complete a paper application? Paper applications are very difficult for some families to have to fill out and then get it wherever it is it needs to go. So you need to think about that. Will my families be able to complete the application process easily? What is the likelihood that my families will complete the process? If the process is challenging, you may have families who say, I don't want to do this, and then it's not going to be a viable funding source for you. And if needed, is the application available in multiple languages? That may be applicable to you depending upon who it is you're serving. All right, let's pull it all together by talking about a particular example. So ABC Childcare is a family childcare home licensed for 6 children and has enrolled the following children: 2 children under 2 years of age, 2 3-year-olds, and 2 4-year-olds. All families are attending 9 hours per day, Monday through Friday. All but 1 child, so 5 out of the 6, is eligible for the Child Care Assistance Program, and 2 are military families. ABC Childcare has a level 4 rating in Colorado Shines. So what might be some of the sources of funding that a family child care teacher should consider accessing for their business, and what do they need to know before deciding to access that funding? Thoughts? CCAP, right. So we've already said that 5 of the 6 families are eligible for CCAP. So if you can handle the administrative costs for CCAP, you're not only benefiting the family by giving them the opportunity to get a quality childcare for less money, but you also have a steady income then. But remember that the Child Care Assistance Program is based on attendance, not enrollment. That's a good one. What else?
Military subsidies?
Military subsidies. So the nuance with military families is that sometimes the military family, the subsidy for that is not applicable to what the provider is eligible to accept. So just like with CCAP, where you have to apply to be a CCAP provider, and with Universal Preschool, where you have to apply to be a UPK provider, for military families, for them to take advantage of subsidy, you have to be an approved military provider. So that is something to think about. What else?
Food program?
Food program, right? So the food assistance program, again, there are requirements for that in terms of income levels for families. There are certain reporting that needs to happen with that. You're also subject to a visit from the state to make sure that your food program is being administered properly. So you need to make sure that that is something that's going to work for you. What else? Grants. Grants are potentially a great source here. Remember that grants are generally good for one-time projects. They are not something that you want to look at generally for sustainable funding. Often you'll get a grant in one particular year and maybe not get it in the next one. So you need to be careful that you're not counting on that as part of your sustainable funding. What else can you think of? Right, tuition. So that's one of the base funding sources for every child care business, is that parents expect to pay at least a portion of their child care, depending upon whether they're eligible for CCAP, eligible for universal preschool, etc. So yes, absolutely, you should make sure that your tuition is counted in there. What else?
Maintaining my quality level?
Yeah, maintaining your quality level. So what funding sources can you use to maintain your quality level? Again, there's often grants that are available through the Early Childhood Council, in our case, joint initiatives, that will help you to do that. This provider is a level 4, and for CCAP, the reimbursements are tiered based on your quality level. 4 and 5 are paid the same thing, so this provider is in great shape in terms of receiving the most amount of funding available through CCAP. Anything else you can think of?
Partnering with Early Head Start?
Partnering with Early Head Start or Head Start, that's a great one. So they have children that are 3 and under, which is the qualification for Early Head Start. So sometimes the Head Start or Early Head Start grantee will partner with family child care homes or even centers, and will want to support you in supporting Head Start eligible families. So that's a great one. Those are all really, really good thoughts. Again, in the business guide, there are all sorts of listing of possible funding sources for you that you should think about. And the only thing that I want to emphasize again is that not all funding sources are created equal. So you want to make absolutely sure that the funding source is going to work for you before you decide to go down that path, because most of them you do have to apply to be eligible for that funding source. All right, that's great, thank you. So we have a lot of resources for you, as we just talked about. The Colorado Department of Early Childhood has lots of information up on their website. Joint Initiatives, the Early Childhood Council, also has information up on their website. The JI website has universal preschool information on it. It has quality grant information on it, and links to all sorts of additional resources. So I would highly suggest that you visit those websites and that you bookmark them once you have, and that you go back to them regularly. The amount of information that is out there to assist child care providers has grown exponentially over the last couple of years. So one should take advantage of that as much as possible. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.